So Keith Armstrong is 69. We did a lot of jokes about being 69. He thought it was hilarious. I thought it was hilarious. Listeners definitely won't. Okay, shall I jump in and do this with the same enthusiasm that I've just done 3 times?
Yeah, let's 1.2x the enthusiasm. Let's get even more out
Let's
of it.
let's really go. Okay, here we go. Hello and welcome to episode 71 of Webflail. I'm your host Jack, your failure connoisseur, and today my guest is Henry Ludlum, otherwise known as Hen Cubed. He is a London-based webflower that is particularly talented at design. Hen-3.com says it all. His portfolio site with clean fonts, shimmering gradients, 3D animations, and elegant, flowing, pleasing websites. Despite being a young gun in the Webflow space, he has worked with YouTube greats such as Ali Abdaal and Jamie Rawthorne, as well as startups too. Fun facts, Henry wears caps a lot. He's currently digital nomading around the world. He's in Turkey at the moment of this call. He's been to 7 countries so far this year. He's bullish on learning spline. We've actually met in real life at the Flow London meetup. But as with anyone that's worked with these types of clients and making the saucy work that he is this early on in his journey, he's had some highs and lows so far. The failures that we'll talk about in today's episode are the first time that he ever got a 10K project, which didn't quite go to plan, a deep sense of shame despite client criticism, which was unfounded, and oversharing and undersharing on Twitter. Henry, welcome to the Webflow podcast.
Thank you. As an avid listener, it's a delight to be on here. Yeah, it's really cool. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's a delight to have you on. And, you know, since you listen to the podcast, obviously, you know the structure, you know my weirdness, and it makes for a better episode. So I'm very glad you do. Thank you for your listens. I'll pay you later. So we have actually done 2 attempts at this recording. This is the 3rd time. So if I kind of zip through that intro for anyone that's listening, and it's like, why is Jack talking so fast? It's because I want to get into the meat of this episode ASAP, because I've already practiced that intro a few times and I still managed to mess it up, but that's fine.
But you nailed it. There was a bit of extra energy there as well. So
a little bit of extra zip because we wanted to get into the meat of the episode. Tell me about your relationship with failure.
So, as you've heard a couple of times now, I would refer to my relationship with failure as being imperfect, but broadly not too bad. So I have a million flaws. I don't think my relationship with failure would be something that I think I need to really, really work on. And primarily that's because I failed a ton growing up. I use my sister, shout out Molly, amazing person. I use her as an example, and we actually had a chat quite recently, and we were laughing about the fact she just always did things first time. She was more socially confident than me, better in school. You know, I just feel like she always jumped through the hoops without too much difficulty. Whereas me, I just found so many things quite hard, and I remember failing a few exams. Like I had to retake one of my A levels. There were these pivotal moments where I was just like, oh fuck, like I did so badly in this. I need to now just work really hard and do it again. And at the time I hated it for sure, and definitely envied my ostensibly seamless sister's life kind of thing, where it was super easy. But we actually had a big chat about it. And as people can probably guess, when you succeed in everything, sometimes when you get older and you do get that, you take that first L or whatever, it can actually be really hard, as opposed to maybe when I take failures, which I still do all the time, by the way, maybe I'm just more used to them. So my relationship with failure is not too bad. And I think it has maybe contributed to me being very non-risk averse. So I love incurring risk. I kind of thrive in it. I think it's really fun. And I'm glad. I think that's for me, in my personal situation, I'm quite pleased that I'm not too scared to fail. And yeah, that'll probably be my relationship.
It's interesting that you talked about the family dynamics here, because I think a lot of the time people don't really kind of take almost zoom out of their immediate answer and be like, okay, what is the family dynamic that has given me the personality that I have? And yeah, the kind of first sibling does often take the hit, as it were, and then the next sibling along's like, wow, I'm just going to go for it. And then I've got a little brother who's just flying. You know, he's just like, well, if these idiots can do it, then I'm just going to go for it, which I think is really healthy. And this reminds me of actually something that my teacher at school said, that he was the bottom set English teacher, and he said, so there's 7 sets at my school, and he was like, the bottom set English will be the ones that will be the bosses of top set English in a few years to come. So don't get cocky, was what his message was to the top set English. And I remember at the time, I wasn't in the top set, just in case you were wondering. I wasn't in the bottom set either. I was kind of middle of the road. But I remember him saying this, and all the top set guys were like, he's just trying to help the, help the morale of the bottom set. Huh? And actually, I mean, no one in my age group is like a boss yet, but I know for a fact that there's a lot of people that are very entrepreneurial in that group, because I think they're just kind of like, they've had setbacks throughout the education system, which have meant that they're not kind of like as formally trained to like jump through the hoops as maybe, like, they're just like, I don't give a fuck, like, I'm just going to do whatever I want because I'm not, maybe this path is like a lot harder, and as a result you're kind of like trained to deal with setbacks and kind of move beyond them, or maybe see different opportunities in a way that you might not if like everything comes easy.
For sure. I think there's like the best, like being sort of 20% scared of failure is a really good middle ground, because I think being 0% scared, unless you're maybe like a stunt double or something, is maybe overkill. And I think you should, always try and pause things at least a little bit before you like go into them. But then you can so easily get into the 80, 90, 100% where you just have no bias to action. So I would say I'm like I have like minimal fear, but I don't have zero fear. I think that's like quite a good place to be in, because it doesn't stop you from doing things, but you just don't overthink things before you do them.
Yeah, there's no like analysis paralysis, but there's a quick like, am I going to die? No, cool, I'll go for it type thing, which I think is healthy. Interesting answer. Sometimes I give that question off the bat in episodes, and people are a bit like, because I haven't, to be fair, I haven't really warmed them up. I've just given them a really difficult question, and you came out the blocks great there. So kudos to you. So tell me a little bit.
I practiced twice.
I mean, we did. Sorry, yeah, I should have said we actually did practice. That's the only reason why we could do such a great deep chat from the get-go. Question. Your design style. Before we started recording this episode, you talked a little bit about how you listened to Webflail episode with Chase, and you were like, damn, I got to message this guy. You're currently in the flat of which Turkish designer?
Aguz, at Aguz, Kara, Yagis, Kara. Yeah, Aguz, Yagis, Kara.
Okay. I mean, it's pretty wild that we're having this conversation in his flat. In my head, I'm like, oh, he's another person that I'd like to interview. But anyway, that's beside the point. What I'm trying to ask you is, you seem the kind of person that when you see work that you are inspired by, or someone that you have, you want the skill set of, you will just message them out the bat and ask for help. And actually, you reached out to me when you had a client problem quite early on. I remember you were just like, hey, I've got this situation. And I was like, well, let's have a call. And we chatted and whatever. And that's actually initially how we connected. But you seem like the kind of person that's just like, I want to not only like look at people who have got the skill sets that I want and study them, but also reach out, ask for help, like talk to people, which I think is a really admirable skill. Can you talk to me about that? Have I accurately reflected you there? Is that fair to say that maybe a lot of your success has come from just being willing to ask for help and going a step further than just studying people that you want the same skill sets of?
That's a really good question. It's an interesting one, because now, maybe in the last 6 months, and I think doing a few kind of high profile, for want of a better word, sites for people who are high profile is a better way to put it. I've had this a lot, and I've been on the other end of a lot of these DMs, and people find my Telegram and my Instagram, like my personal, like my non-work related things, and I get a heaps of like DMs and stuff, which is really very flattering. And I don't really like, I still get imposter syndrome for that stuff. But the truth is, now I'm on the other side of the curtain to some extent. There's people out there getting like way more messages, I'm sure, but like I do get a few from people who I presume are in similar positions to that which I was a year ago or so. And it's very interesting to me seeing the different ways people message. And I think from that, I then had a reflection on how I would approach people like yourself or Aguz or any of the people that I've messaged. And there is a right way to do it, basically. To be like blunt, there's very much a right way to go about seeking someone's advice or help. And then that's the kind of the bad news, that you can get it wrong. But the good news is it's quite simple to get it right. And I think a real genuine, authentic eagerness to learn really shines through. And if you combine that with like a level of humility and non-expectance is key. If someone messages me and they end the message and it's some sort of like, oh, how did you do this? Or like, I saw this on your website, can I have the code snippet? If the message ends with, but hey, you're probably super busy, so like seriously, if you just want to like read this, and yeah, just know that I like your work. Like worst case, just take this as like a message of like thanks. I will stop what I'm doing and find them that code snippet like every time, because it's so, I just love that energy.
Respectful.
It's so respectful, because like you're a freelancer, you'll get this, and people listening will get this. It's not rude to be busy, and that's something that I for so long was a bit scared of. I think, to be like, if someone doesn't do this thing for me, then it's because they didn't like me, or they thought I was pestering them. Like, no, it's not that. It's just there's limited hours in the day is the sad truth. And I think if someone like notices that and then doesn't seem expectant or like they're entitled to it, that's like a really nice thing. And then it just makes me like feel really happy inside, and I'm like, I will find you that code snippet, whoever it is, right? Whereas if it's slightly blunt and just like, what did you do here? Like, how do I do this? You might get left on red. Like, it's just a simple truth, and I would expect to be left on red if I did that a year ago, or if I did that now, kind of thing. Because I think, to be like really candid here, it's just a little bit lazy to do that when you could like approach it from a different way. But I'm curious what your take on that is. Maybe that's too harsh.
No, I have exactly the same thing. So to come back to the imposter syndrome thing to start with, I mean, I am actually not freelancing, nor am I building an agency, but I'm doing a podcast asking people how they have become successful doing both of those two things. So talk about imposter syndrome, man. I mean, I'm right in there. How I've kind of framed that one is that I am more curating other people's success and trying to basically distill their wisdom into a format that other people can understand. So just to touch on that point, that's how, I'm also getting messages about freelancing, about agency running, that frankly, I'm ill-equipped. I'm trying my best to point them in the right direction, though, when I do get those types of messages. Or, I've got some experience about freelancing at least, and I can give them a little bit of my take on it. But I do also hopefully have a lot of resources to give other people. So just to touch on that. Now, how people reach out to me definitely determines how I respond / if I respond as well. I've been getting the more I've done this podcast, the more I get messages, and I mean, I do think like this kind of spray and pray approach that people have to getting advice about their portfolio, for example, like it's so obvious when they have no idea about what I'm up to, whether they're just like, hey Jack, can you review my portfolio? And you're just there like, I mean, why? Like, that's like, imagine someone coming up to you on the street and just being like, hey, give me money. It's kind of a similar situation. Like, I have no context for why I should give you money. And actually, funny story about that. I saw a guy in Buenos Aires. He was I was sat outside this ice cream shop eating an ice cream, and he went around and asked everyone for money, got given some money, went into the ice cream shop, bought the ice cream, and literally like walked out. And the person that gave him that money was just like, what? You literally just bought an ice cream with the money that, like, it was like, oh. Anyway, that's by the by. That's not really relevant to this story. I think if you're respectful of someone's time, if you recognize that they may not reply, if you sign off the message by saying, look, no worries if you're too busy to reply, totally fine, I get it. You're a busy person. Or maybe they've just, they say, oh, I've listened to this episode with Hen Cubed or whoever, and just, and I heard that you recommended this book. I wondered if you recommend any other books that I should, like, oh my God, I'm going to reply to that with a fucking essay.
Yeah, hit me with my value system.
Right.
Like do like, oh, not
do
even
your
me.
due diligence.
Yeah, like even when I'm messaging other people, and I don't want to at all sound like I'm now the guy who gets the messages. Like, oh no way, like I'm 1% along the way that where I want to be at least. I'm just further along than I was a year ago, and I'm reaching out to people all the time. And I would say my rate's pretty good. And to kind of answer your question in a word, perhaps, I think authenticity is the strongest, like, kind of factor, or it's the strongest constant if you're looking to get like someone replying to you. So like take that extra 5-10 minutes to really just like go through their profile, go through their work, lead with some praise or something that you liked rather than like diving into the question, but equally keep it relatively brief, because like an essay is not exactly something that you might have time to read. But yeah, just being like excited for them and their work and authentic, and it's just day really.
And this also relates to not just getting advice about stuff, but also applying for jobs. I think a lot of the time I keep seeing these threads. I think Dylan Harrick's had one, Harry Roper had one, about they put up a Twitter post being like, hey, I'm looking for a Webflow developer, DM me. And the amount of DMs, like they went through what people did well, what people didn't. So I recommend checking that out. But this idea of respect, really, and doing your due diligence and being authentic, like all of those things, people talk about a lot. And I think anyone listening is like, yeah, cool, Jack, yeah, cool, Henry, like, move on to the next section, please, guys. But so few people do this. So few people. So if you are trying to get work from an agency, if you are reaching cold emailing clients and get their name wrong, first line or whatever, there's so many basic things. It's like, just do a little bit more. Do a little bit more, and you will be in the top 10% straight away. I actually got a job with Crafted Studios. Shout out to Dexter Washington and the team, because I literally replied to his newsletter with a thoughtful response. And I wasn't looking for work, but I just replied to his newsletter. You know how few people do that? And you know how impactful that is when you spend some time creating something and then someone replies to it with a really thoughtful message. And we had a call and I got some work from it. But what I'm saying is that it's so simple, but so often overlooked. So just wanted to highlight that for anyone that's listening, is like, and also, then you can go and stay at their houses just like you are.
Yeah, that's the thing. Secretly, I'm just out here.
Basically, you are you're just Webflow couch surfing is essentially what you've taken this being respectful to a new level. You are disrespecting.
I don't actually build websites anymore. Yeah.
You've gone so far over respectful to I am now staying at their house. No, but I think it's worth highlighting as much as, I was kind of joking at the end there. It's really, really important to do your due diligence. That's hard to say quickly. And that relates to, not just asking for advice, but trying to get work from agencies, applying for jobs, but also, cold emailing clients.
Facts.
Yes, appreciate that. Okay, so we have got a really good basis for where you are at now in your freelancing journey. Let's talk a little bit about why you're in Turkey. So you've moved 7 different countries. Tell me why you are moving 7 different countries.
For sure. I'll try and speed run it. So I'm from South London, a little town called Wallington. It's kind of near Croydon, and been there my whole life. So like London, I feel like a Londoner, I guess. But I'm not exactly enamored by London. I think it's a cool place, but I don't think I want to live there long term necessarily, but I don't know where else I would live. So obviously blessed with the freelancer ability to do some nomadic traveling. My tenancy ran out in August of this year. I was living in East London, in Hackney, and then I was like, okay, I could go home until Christmas and then just rent again in London, or I could do some work abroad. And then I was like, oh, the WEBFLOW conference in SF, that would be a really good excuse to like do some traveling. And yeah, shout out Pat Timmons, the social media lead for WEBFLOW, who just did his absolute best to get me a ticket. And I ended up getting a ticket, which was really, really cool. And so that kind of formed the basis for my traveling. And I did a few countries before and a few states after, and ending in Turkey. So yeah, it's been really, really fun. I think obviously you've been doing your own traveling, so I'm sure we have a lot to get into here. But it's a weird one. I've had a really, really good time, and yeah, I can't with any certainty say that there is a country that I went into or a place that I went into where I felt like, oh, I could settle here for more than, you know, a trip. I could actually spend a few years here. I don't think I felt that anywhere. So very, very much confused and trying to work out where I'm going to be next year. But try not to overthink it. It's such a luxury to have those options, that it's certainly not something, it's not like a bane on my life. It is just a bit of a challenge to work out, perhaps.
Yeah, I definitely think there's this strange sense that you know, being a webflower, you want freedom, whether that freedom is financial freedom, freedom to choose what projects you work on, when you work, all of this type of stuff, and then you start freelancing, and I think you've quickly realized that it's a lot harder than just I'm going to Webflow freelance and now I have freedom to choose what I do and where I go and all of that stuff. But then I think you get to a point where it is actually feasible, and then you kind of are like, oh my god, I actually kind of have some financial freedom. I can maybe think about living abroad and you know, choosing my projects a bit more and stuff. And then you do that. Well, this is what I found, and maybe you're talking about the same thing. And then you realize that you actually kind of miss that wet, windy rock on the edge of Europe that you came from. And
something about her, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. It's actually you kind of, and then you kind of get back to basics a bit, and you realize, oh, actually, you know, maybe this. I think there's a kind of limit where financial freedom serves you, and then beyond that, it's like actually it doesn't make that much difference. I found it's quite weird. You're kind of like, oh, this actually like serving the lifestyle that I want more so than I did when I was earning less from projects and stuff. I don't know. Not that I've like I said, not that I am like big baller shot caller, to use the words of, I think that's Big John, the rapper.
I'm glad he featured on the podcast.
I have no idea. It's especially in my accent as well. I mean, for me to just be like big baller shot caller, it just sounds really odd. But we'll have to edit that out. My point is, though, that yeah, there's this strange sense of dislocation when you you know, live and work abroad, and you have this paradox of choice as a freelancer, which is amazing. But actually, you know, it's far easier to choose the food on a menu when you have only 3 choices compared to a menu which has you know, infinite pages, and you're like, actually I have no idea what is best for me right now, and you kind of navigate through that, I found, until you work out what's best for you. But yeah, resonate a lot with what you're saying. So what you're saying is, though, you're going to be going back to England for next year, you reckon?
It's the most likely option without being certain. Yeah, probably.
Dude, I'm thinking about moving to Bristol. Come with.
My cousin lives in Bristol, actually. Shout out, Jim.
Shout out,
yeah.
Jim. I'm going to be living with Jim, so why don't you come join?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny you say that, because I'm thinking of UK but not London. So Manchester was on my hit up the Manchester. Shout out Flow Manchester, by the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe, of course, yeah. So there's a potential. I think I need to do some thinking. Or Turkey. I'm not gonna lie, I love Turkey, and the gang here is really nice and stupidly talented. So I'm always learn a lot when I come here. and it's not that far from the UK, a couple of hours. So
I mean, I think you need to look at a map, man. I think that's definitely further than Manchester to London.
Yeah,
but
well, it depends what the trains are like. Not to turn
to be
this into
fair,
like
hey,
NFL like hatred podcast, but
yeah,
you know,
we have turned this podcast from Webflow advice to
Rail
just
the
a
podcast.
random chit chat.
Yeah.
Shout out to shout out to the English train system. It's one of the most efficient in the world. For anyone that's not from England who's listening to this, that is sarcasm. Okay, tell me about failure number 1. First time you ever got a 10K project that didn't quite go to plan.
Yes. Also, the first time we ever spoke, which I'd forgotten. For anyone listening, we've done this pod intro a couple of times, and I was completely under the impression that day had been a very sad solo day, and it was in many ways, but it was also a day where I chatted to this charming gentleman on the other side of the screen for the first time, which was really
glad
cool.
Glad you remembered that.
I was in a really shit place that day, and this is the reason why, I guess, to answer your question. So had been doing projects, I'd been starting to charge a bit more for projects, but I hadn't hit the grail, the 10K grail, which is an obscene amount of money, and at the time I had never earned anywhere near that, for a single instance of a project. So I was very excited to get the project request through. It seemed super legit. They seemed really excited. Jumped on a call with them. I won't go into detail, obviously, of who they were, but they were based in South Africa, and from what I could tell, and it was a proper team. Oftentimes I'm just talking to like one person, two people max, who are like leading the project, or they're just a one-person army or whatever. But this was a real team. I felt like they had divisions and strategies and officers, and there was a hierarchy and stuff. So I was like, oh shit, they're the real deal. This is no wonder that they have purchasing power, right? So it was all very exciting, very professional, and I felt like, oh, this is a new chapter, blah blah blah. They're going to refer me, maybe. Got way ahead of myself, which is failure number 0.5, if you will. I immediately was I hope in a very non-arrogant way. It wasn't like, oh, I'm the king. It was just more like, oh my goodness, like this is my next chapter, like let's go kind of vibe. It was like a pride without being like, oh yeah, easy. I think I was still very nervous talking to them, but I was excited. Anyway, start the call, chatting to them, and they are ironically even to this day, that's one of the best. I've never come off a call feeling so confident, well liked. I felt really confident in my own ability to have convinced them, because it was still like a sales call in a way. It was trying to close the deal, and I came off the call feeling great, and then immediately started working, and I wanted to be the guy who like left the call and immediately presented them some work, like mocked up some logos for them, yada yada yada. Started a whole Figma file, invited them. It's worth saying I also invited them all as editors, and Figma has a few kind of shady pricing things. You probably heard, like they don't remind you to remove editors, and you can end up paying like loads of money when you have like a client. And I'm sure people are rolling their eyes and groaning right now, people listening, because I'm sure we've all been like burnt by that before. I certainly have. So I actually lost money from this project, which I'm now remembering, because I added all of them, like 12 people, made them all editors, blah blah blah. New mistake. And I probably did 2 or 3 days work, which, yeah, that's, those, and they were long days. I was really like throwing myself into this. I was hearing back from them. They were being like, okay, yeah, let's sort out payment, but I didn't get them to sign a contract. Classic. And I also didn't pause work until I got paid. I'm sure we've all been there. And yeah, the failure there was essentially an overexcitement, and over-pleasing nature, and just this desire to be the person who like dived into the work, because in my head I parsed that as something positive and professional, when actually that's very unprofessional. Now that I've come to realize, to not immediately go into like, okay, let's sort the contract out, and then I'll start when the 50% or whatever the deposit is has been paid. And yeah, they all came in and just like, I could tell they were like taking the assets and stuff, and then started to get quiet. And then I just got one Slack message. They had the decency to not ghost me, I guess, but they were like, hey, sorry, we're pausing this project indefinitely. Something came up. verbatim quote, by the way, something came up, which stings even to this day. So something came up is like, I don't know, that's what I'd say if I was meant to get coffee with someone, you know, and then like something came up, not kind of £10,000. So it was pretty sad. It was pretty peak. But yeah, they sent that. And then I've checked their website to this day. They are using some of the assets I made. I haven't pursued it or anything because life's too short. But yeah, just a bit of a shit show, really. And then I was just sat in WeWork, and I have a memory of being in WeWork, obviously South African time. So for them, it was the morning when they sent that, but it was like 2 a.m., maybe 3 a.m. for me. And I think that's when I sent you the message, and we chatted the next day. And I was just sat in 8 Devonshire Square WeWork. Shout out anyone who goes there. And yeah, it just sucked. And I just sat there for ages not doing anything. And you know what's really sad is instead of feeling like I hadn't made 10K, I felt like I'd lost 10K. And that was the worst bit of it, because in my head, that 10K was in my bank account. I was already thinking of like the savings or the spendings, or like investing in myself, getting a new laptop, like all these business costs that I really cared about and still do care about. It felt like I'd lost that money. And it was, yeah, just a sad day, but like lots of lessons to learn from that. And it's one of the reasons we connected. So every cloud.
I want to give you a hug.
I'll take an e-hug if you've got one going.
Can I do that?
Oh yeah, that's good.
For anyone that's listening to the podcast, I'm just kind of covering the camera with my fat hands as I try and mimic a hug. Lessons learned. Talk me through what you've now changed to ensure that that never happens again.
I don't want to lie on the podcast, so I can't say I do this with every client, but 99% of clients, I now don't start work until the contract's signed. I've had my contract. This isn't to suggest you have to do this. And when you're starting out, like a template contract is absolutely fine. When you move into slightly bigger numbers, I think it's really important to spend a few £100 to get a lawyer to actually look through your template and look through your boilerplate, and to give you like legal confidence that what you're sending out is good. I'd say it's one of the best investments I've ever made. Maybe spent £400 or £500 for like an hour or two, because lawyers are so expensive, right? But it was like a really good lawyer, like a proper lawyer. And they just read through my terms and conditions and actually made some tweaks, and like found some potential things that could be loopholed in a worst case. And it was annoying to spend that money, but now I have like really strong confidence whenever I send that contract out. So the point being, don't start work until you have a contract out, and definitely don't start work until you've been paid at least a percentage sum. I'm super I'm happy to say mine's always 50-50. It always has been. I think it's I don't actually do like 50, 20, 30, 10, or, that's just because it's kind of time consuming to have to send those invoices out. I'm lazy. Like I should do 50-50. And unless it's a client I have a really strong personal relationship with, and it's my 3rd or 4th time working with them, I would happily work with, Ali Abdaal and the team without doing a contract. I feel very secure in that relationship. And maybe that's still a mistake just from like a professional point of view. But yeah, that's essentially the main thing I learned, is just like get paid before you start work, like everyone else does in every other industry. So why shouldn't you?
Great. Okay, so things we learned there: don't start working before you get paid. Have a deposit, and or at least something in your contract that says this amount at this point, this amount at this point. I know some people talk about doing checkpoints. So at checkpoint 1, pay this. At checkpoint 2, like 50, 25, 25, or whatever. But I actually think it's quite smart to have just 2 big payments, because they're committing a lot up front, which they're saying, look, we are investing in both you doing the job, but also us doing the job. Like, we are going to be there when it doesn't make sense for them to ghost. Like, you're both kind of putting your hats in the ring, as it were, if they're putting that much kind of forward. So I think that's quite, that makes sense in my head. And then the other thing that we talked about there is, like, if you have a really, really good relationship with a client and you do repeat work with them, then, maybe you've got the trust and that they're going to pay you on time, that, their team well enough, etc. So it's a slightly different scenario. But like, if you've never worked with someone, don't just trust that they are nice people. The amount of times I've been like, wow, I get off a call, I'm like, they seem like such nice guys. Let's just start. Come on, I'm excited for this project, and then it's just like actually you realize that you don't necessarily know people well enough to make that judgment call. So yeah, sounds like a healthy thing. Also for big boy projects, sounds like getting a lawyer is a very, very good investment of money. Something I've never done because I've never done projects that big, but that does make a ton of sense. Anything I missed there?
No, I maybe another small mistake, and this is something I try and do. Maybe this is because having listened to obviously a lot of people on this pod have sadly had a similar experience, right? And I hear often people like the contract stuff comes up, or they're like, make sure you get paid, or don't rush into work. I think something maybe less spoken about, which would be maybe interesting to just briefly touch on, is if I go on a call, which is really exciting, I allow myself to be excited in the call, because I think that's a good way to like close calls that, like seem really like excited by the product. If you are excited, there's no, it's not good to hide that. But if I come off a call which seems like too good to be true, or like amazing, sometimes they are too good to be true, and sometimes they're not, and they just end up being really amazing projects. But I try and just take 5 minutes before doing anything. So usually I take calls in like a WeWork booth or a room or whatever. And when the call's done, I think me a year ago would run off. Sometimes I'll be texting my friends or the people, my other freelancers doing similar things, being like, oh, I think I've got this really cool gig coming up. Call went really well. I just gas myself up and gas the whole situation up a bit. And that I don't actually think is a very good idea. And since having stopped doing that, I feel a little bit more level-headed when it comes to projects. And that's not to say temper your excitement or don't enjoy what you do, because that's the reason most of us are doing this thing, because it's really fun and it's really creative and awesome. But maybe just take that 5 minutes just to let the dopamine just come down a little bit, just to let the serotonin, the oxytocin, because I don't know how listeners are on calls, but if they're anything like me, on some calls, they like their heart's racing and stuff. And just because the project sounds really cool, or you're like, I don't know, the domain's like an amazing domain, and you're like, oh my goodness, I want to be associated with this, put it on my portfolio, might get referrals or whatever it is. Sometimes the project's just really cool. And I just think just taking a bit of stock after you come off those calls, I don't know, I just feel like it's a good thing to do. It's a good thing to do.
Healthy. Yeah. It's a bit like going on a date and imagining, how you're going to propose to that person before you've even got your main course. It's just like, whoa, cowboy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an important thing to consider, that like when things are too good to be true, when things seem too good to be true, it's a kind of cliche thing, but they often are. But yes, important to highlight that. Can we just touch on how you worked with Ali Abdaal? You said you've worked with him and you trust his team. It sounds like you've worked with him multiple times. Mm-hmm. If anyone is like, oh my God, you've worked with Ali Abdaal, that's a big name. I often talk about his podcast on this podcast. So it's quite a weird thing for you to have actually like done his websites and know him personally. For me, like, tell me about how you actually get that type of a client.
For sure, yeah. A lot of luck is the simple answer. And yeah, that's not at all being false humble. It's a ton of luck, and it's something I'm really grateful for. Essentially, just had some work that was. I have a friend who at the time, I'm trying to think if they were they were working full time, but they were relatively early on. Essentially, just some of my work was seen by Ali Abdaal's manager on the screen of my friend, who was looking at it from an Instagram post I think I shared. So he was finding it through like a social medium. I wasn't even sharing it in like a Twittery way, like a more businessy way, I guess. So that was just kind of like the eyes laying on it was just really lucky. So that was kind of the luck element. And then I would say did a few like more basic websites for them, and those went well and came into the office. And I think we all get along really well. It's massive shout out to Ali Abdaal, Angus Tintin, like the whole team is amazing. The dream client, really, in so many ways. I always feel like I have agency over like that. I feel like I'm trusted in terms of what I think will look good, what will sound good, which is really cool. Just kind of the dream client, really. But there is, yeah, I wish it was a more interesting story, or there was some sort of like special sauce, but right place, right time. So yeah. I think you're muted, by the way.
Such a COVID thing to happen.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, there's something going on in the background, so that's why. I'm glad that you said that it was kind of luck. You know, it's like, it's sometimes things happen and that leads to other things, but what's not luck is that you did a great job and you keep getting consistent work from that. Like, that's kind of where traction happens, once you actually take that luck and use it to your advantage to actually ensure that it is good luck rather than bad luck.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a fair statement. There's a really nice quote, which I'm about to butcher, by the way, because I only remember like half of it, but it's something along the lines of, when something good comes along, sometimes all you can really do is seize it with both hands and just be like grateful for it. And like, but in the same way, sometimes bad things come along, right? And yeah, it's partly luck, and then what you do with that luck often translates to things which are, you know, slightly more like actually relevant to you and the work you put in, or the time spent, or whatever.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Gorgeous.
Tell me about failure number 2. Deep sense of shame despite client criticism, which was unfounded.
Yeah, I think towards the start, I remember doing like 1 or 2 gigs on Fiverr pretty early on. And long story short, although I think I've said that like twice now and then like rambled on, so I really will try and keep this one short. I felt like I've had before a client backing out because the sphere they were in wasn't doing very well, and the site I was building for wasn't doing very well. And instead of just saying that, the excuse they used to try and like end the project early, or terminate, or get a refund, or whatever it was, all that time ago, was to just critique my work and be like, oh, even though they'd been very happy up until this point, I should add a very important context. Kind of, it was a switch flicked, which correlated with like a major market event for that sphere, without going into too much detail. And so for me, I'm quite confident that that was a correlation. And yeah, I've received like a scathing email, very long email, just like delineating all this like stuff I hadn't done and blah, blah, blah. And I guess the failure there was twofold. The failure there was, maybe I hadn't baked into my systems something like that happening. Maybe I should have done more research into that sphere to be like, this is super volatile. Like, do I trust that this project will go smoothly, kind of thing. And the second failure is more personal, maybe. And it's a failure to just like have maybe a bit more confidence, or a bit more of a backbone, or self-worth in that moment, to just like try and take that critique a bit on the nose, and to kind of just like, because I knew deep down that it was pretty unfounded, but it really got to me, and like I felt like embarrassed. I remember feeling like shame, like, oh, I'm terrible at what I do. I really let it affect me. And yeah, that's just, these things sometimes do, I think, because I care about outputting good work. I try to, that it just hit different. It hit so, and I'd never had any feedback like that before, which isn't to say every project I'd done had been, oh my God, 10 out of 10. But it'd been like, I felt like every client I'd handed off to had been like, at least very happy. You know, at a basis, they'd been like very pleased. They felt like they got their money's worth, and a few clients were super happy. And that's what I was used to. And then all of a sudden there was a client who wasn't even average. They were like, this is bad, pretty much. And yeah, that sucked. And that got to me, but it hasn't happened since, thankfully. So I don't know what that means. Maybe that those people are just few and far between, and maybe I've gotten a bit better as well. So who knows?
There's a few different things that you said there. So, I mean, essentially they were working in a volatile market, and you are thinking that what happened was things went downhill for them, and as a result, they were just like, well,
they got cold feet.
I don't have the money to continue doing this project. So what I'm going to do is, instead of just saying, hey, I am really sorry, but embarrassingly, like, I can't actually carry on doing this project, and I need to reassess, and as a result, I'm going to put this project on hold, and we're going to stop. Instead, this person was like, your work is terrible, and that's why we're stopping. Okay, so bye. And you're
And
just
what's
like,
crazy
wait,
is
what?
in both scenarios, I don't get paid. So like, if you're not going to pay me, like that sucks. And like, it's, you know, it's going to happen at some point to everyone, almost certainly. But if you're going to like back out and kind of like renege on the contract, then like, don't also back out whilst like calling me like a dickhead as you walk out the room. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, come on. I would have been able to take the L so much better if they'd have just come clean and just been a bit more honest. There is also worth saying, there is a third scenario where I'm like totally just like gaslighting myself right now. My work was shit, and maybe I'm just like telling myself that it wasn't that bad. But like I'm reasonably confident that it wasn't, mostly because their feedback had been really good up until that point. But it is worth saying there's a chance maybe the work was bad. Who knows?
It is strange though for a client to be like, "This is great, this is great, this is great." You're a piece of shit. Like to suddenly go from 0 to 100 like that, or I
Weird
don't know.
energy.
I don't
Yeah.
think 0 to 100 is the right phrase. Completely like doing
100 to 0, if you will.
yeah, 180. If anyone is not English listening to this episode, they're going to be, there's a lot of you use words like peak,
Yeah, so
got the L, things like that. Peak is bad for anyone that wondered what that meant earlier on in the episode, and take the L is take the loss. So just in case anyone's listening to this who's not from the UK, that's what those mean.
South London, yeah. No, actually, yeah. I'm glad you did that. That's actually very thoughtful. Yeah.
No, I was just thinking, like, as we were listening, it's really because I'm speaking Spanish a lot during the time, because I'm in Buenos Aires right now, and there's words that people use that I'm just like, what the hell is that? There's this word called quilombo, which is basically like a mess. And there's been elections on in Argentina, so I keep hearing this word, and I'm like, what the hell is quilombo? So I'm just quite conscious of that for any any slang that we're using that listeners can understand what's going on, because I'm always thinking, what the hell does that slang mean? Okay, I didn't think I needed to go as far into that as I did. Tell me about failure number 3, oversharing and undersharing on Twitter.
This is, I mean, best for last, as they say. This is having, again, listen to the pod. And I think the first 2 things I've said are hopefully useful. And I hope listeners find, some sort of value, or at least entertainment in those stories. But I feel like they have been discussed before, and they're relatively common, sadly, to like, I don't know anyone who doesn't have an experience like that, really. And I know you've had an experience like that as well. But this one I think is slightly more niche, and hopefully is a bit of a, I don't know, is useful. And it's essentially, it's kind of a paradox. When I started out, and this would have been for context, June 2022, so just a year and a bit ago, when I was actually starting to like get clients, build my first few sites, try and get a portfolio together. It was before I even had my latest version of my website and all these things. I started to post on Twitter, and I was doing the whole like go hard on Twitter, post every day, a thread at least twice a week, or whatever the things I was aiming for were. But I was just posting the wrong stuff, and like the energy was there, but the direction wasn't, and the content was just so not what it could have been. And the stuff I was posting it wasn't even like show my work stuff, which I think is a cool thing to do. However good your work is, showing your work is always good, because worst case, you'll just get critical feedback, which is obviously going to be useful, and best case, people will like it and engage with it and stuff. But I was kind of sharing like not quite work, slightly like basic platitudes, like it's so bad. Like I'll try and find some. It might still be on my Twitter if you scroll back far enough. But it was just like, it just wasn't interesting or unique, and it wasn't original, and it was just like rubbish. But at the same time, what I was doing in my actual life was, and these are, to be over candid perhaps about the figures, I'd spent pretty much the last money I had, it was like 30% of my net worth at the time, on like a single plane ticket to Canada, because I was just like, fuck it, if I'm going to learn these things, I might as well just be in like a totally different environment, no distractions. I didn't know anyone in Toronto at all, so just like, I was just go do that. I found like a dog sitting gig, so I was like saving as much money as I could to like just live out there. And I was, watching all the greats like Timothy Ricks, WebFlail, shout out to all those people. It was great to meet, actually. Massive shout out to WebFlail in particular, because we met at the conference, and it was really cool to be like, yo, dude, like learned so much from your videos kind of thing. It's like a really special moment. So yeah, shout out Keegan. But the point being, I was doing a really cool thing, but I wasn't sharing it. And as I said to you earlier, even in the position I'm in now, you know, like I would love to follow that journey and engage with that sort of journey of someone like going from 0 to 30, as I tend to call it, because I was still like massively a beginner, yada yada yada. But it was just a cool thing I was doing, and I was like basically self-teaching all this stuff and trying to like reach out and do cool things. And I think that would have been a much cooler journey to share, and then I could have shared my progress and the designs I was working on. But instead, I was kind of just spamming my timeline with like shit. So that's what I mean when I say I was like oversharing, but also undersharing. I was just undersharing the wrong things, because I think stuff which pertains to your personal journey is just a lot more interesting, and I think people can relate to it a lot more. And if I look at my timeline now, which is much more heavily curated, and I'm quite purposeful in who I follow and who I like engage with and stuff, they're all doing really, their output is amazing, but also that they're amazing. And that's the point. Like as a freelancer, you're the sum of your parts, and you should be defined by your work, but equally you should be defined by who you are as a freelancer. You know who you are. And that's, I think, a really good example is Grace on the Grid. And I love following Grace on the Grid because you learn about like so much more than just her output, which is really stellar and really good. But you see, like, I don't know, like her interior design stuff. And if you're interested in maybe like running and stuff, you might be following her for more like lifestyle stuff. I hope that makes sense. But yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute there. Yes, 100% it does. And I think this is something that I actually spoke to with Janae Kotzer as well. She's like, oh, I don't want to start posting until I know what I should be posting about. And I think what you do in your day-to-day defines, that's unique because it's your life, right? And I'm not saying you need to necessarily post, you know, pictures of your food and stuff like that. But I do think like your personal story is what people are going to be emotionally invested in. And off the back of that, like, you know, the work that you do, sharing the progress as much as the end result is something that we've talked a lot about on this podcast. Like, you know, if you're a Webflower that's doing a client project, you know, share sketches of wireframes, share, you know, inspiration that you've got from all over the web, share your big, like the resources that you've found for code snippets or what, like, I think that type of stuff goes hand in hand with your personal life at whatever stage you're at, regardless of if you're in first year of freelancing, 10th year of freelancing, you know, 10th hire as an agency owner, like wherever you are, as if you're sharing, you know, the work that you're doing day in, day out, but also your lifestyle day in, day out a little bit, I think it gives people a real sense of who you are more holistically, and it makes them a lot more appealing to, you know, engage with, share. I know that when I post videos of Bill and I, my little brother who edits this podcast, you know, people love that because it's like, oh, you guys are brothers and you're working together on the podcast, and that's a really cool thing to know. It's not like they're going to follow me just because of me posting pictures of my brother, obviously, but it's like part of my story, and that's unique to me. So I think that's a really cool thing to highlight, which we haven't actually talked about on the podcast. Like, obviously people talk about sharing your work a lot and sharing the different stages of that process, not just the end result, because a tweet lasts whatever 2 minutes. But, you know, yeah, dripping in a little bit about your life and where you're at and what your ambitions and goals are and stuff. I think that's a really, really cool bit of feedback. Is there anything else that I've missed there from what you've said that we should highlight here for anyone listening?
On the third point.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting. It goes back to one of the earlier things we were saying of, you know, how to cold DM someone, you know, how to send the perfect message. But outside of messages, just in terms of comments, kind of in the public sphere, on the timeline, so to speak, considered comments which, you know, engage or ask questions are also just like a really good thing to do. And it's, again, I say this as someone who didn't do that for a long time and still could do it way more if I'm honest with myself. But all the times I've kind of engaged properly, for want of a better word, with like, I don't know, things I found cool or whatever, more often than not has ended in some cool stuff. And it's probably, I think, one of the reasons me and Vim have ended up being like pretty close. And, you know, I've gone to visit him in like Chiswick, and he's come to London and stuff, because we were just kind of engaging with each other's work publicly, and then we just, you know, started DMing each other. So like really cool relationship, and that's like someone I consider a good friend now. So like good relationships can come from these things, just as much as good work opportunities or, you know, augmenting your talent or whatever can come from them. So it's just like, yeah, it's extra special.
I was going to say, like, for anyone that's listening who's like, well, why should I be posting on Twitter? Why should I be posting on LinkedIn? There's obviously people that are doing it to potentially attract clients, and that's hence why we always talk about showing your work, because that is generally what, you know, Webflowers are using social media platforms to do from for one part of their life, right? Like, you know, you want to potentially use that as a lead generation channel. But on the other hand, there's just the human connection of finding other freelancers who are doing what you do, connecting, making friends, not feeling alone, because a lot of freelancers are obviously, you know, working solo, and it's amazing what can happen out of that with collaborations, etc. But yeah, don't just think, oh, I need to post to connect with people. It's actually the social part of the social media is the talking. So, you know, replying to comments that you get when you do post, replying to other people's posts, and then that can start incredible things, you know, incredible relationships, whether that's with clients, whether that's friends to collaborate on, you know, app development or whatever from there. I think a lot of the time as well, people think, oh, well, you know, I want to get clients from social media, like I want to post to get clients. So they might be posting things thinking, okay, I need to like attract my ideal client. But the word client in my head has completely changed from when I first started freelancing. A client might be anyone. It might be an agency that you collaborate with or partner with. It might be another freelancer that you collaborate with on a project. It might be someone that you like is completely outside of what you thought your typical client might be, but they might DM you and say, hey, I saw that you're doing this web design stuff. What, like, can we have a call? Like, it's amazing to kind of consider this whole use of social media as something that's way wider than getting clients. And then also when you think about getting clients, like how wide the term client can be, I think.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's very like incisive point. I think, yeah, what you see, like anthropomorphize a client as when you're starting out is very different from how you view them when you're a little bit more like settled into the whole game, for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think that's worth saying, because someone asked me yesterday, how do I get clients from Twitter? And I was like, well, let's dig into what that word clients means, because I feel like it's maybe not necessarily thought of as a broader term. It can be literally anyone in my experience. Like it's kind of crazy. Okay, we have rattled through these 3 failures. What I'm going to do is do a quick recap, and then I'm going to ask you the hardest question you've ever been asked in the history of time. Are you ready?
Probably not, but let's do it.
Okay, sweet. Okay, the failures that we talked about in today's episode are first time Henry ever got a 10K project that didn't quite go to plan. So why didn't it quite go to plan? Well, the reality is you might have this shiny 10K project, but unless you do the basics well, unless you get a deposit up front, you have a contract signed, unless you actually have that in the bank, as it were, then you know that they are committed to the project just as much as you are. And you have a legal document, which means that you are protected if things go down the pan. And without doing that, this whole 10K could just be a pipe dream. You could be imagining the new laptop that you're going to buy, which is going to help your freelance business grow, or potentially invest in an assistant or whatever. But that 10K is literally just an idea unless you do the basics of, you know, running a business, which is essentially what you are as a freelancer. You are a business. You are a small business. You need to have some kind of business practices in place in order to make sure that you have consistent cash flow, that the creative work is being paid for. Deep sense of shame and guilt with this client criticism, which was unfounded. Sounds like lessons learned there were: do your due diligence of the client that you're being hired by, to make sure that their industry is relatively secure and that they are the person that they say they are. Also ensure that you have sign off at different parts of the process so that this project can move along smoothly and that your client is happy and you know where they're at with consistent communication. And then also, I think this whole thing about getting ghosted, like, hopefully if you are over communicating with your client, you know where their head's at. And it sounds like this project slightly kind of lost control as you both struggled to communicate clearly until he sounded like he didn't really have an industry that was safe to be in, and as a result blamed you, which is on your it's his bad, I would say. But also, there's a kind of salsa dance, as it were, with you and the client, that you need to guide them through the process, and over communicating is generally a good way of doing that. Oversharing and undersharing on Twitter. Interesting conversation at the end of this episode where we discussed how it's important to share not just the end result of your work, but also the different bits that make up your process, so that we have kind of consistency. You're staying top of mind of people that you're sharing on Twitter, but also that you're maybe dripping in a little bit of your personal story, so that we have a little bit of an understanding as to who you are, why we should care about you. And also, just important to say that clients can come from anywhere. It's not like a client is necessarily someone from your ideal industry, which you want to provide Webflow design and development work to. It might be another agency. It might be another freelancer. So be a nice human being online. Comment on different people's posts. Make people feel good. And they will, in turn, through the law of reciprocation, maybe want to make you feel good too, whether that's friendship, maybe that's simply going for a drink, getting some advice about freelancing, having a network, or potentially paying you to do some Webflow work with them. Henry, did I summarize that okay? Is there anything that I've missed off that we should highlight at the end of this episode in the recap?
That was bang on. That was like ChatGPT 7 level.
Wow, that's a bit scary. Thank you very much for that comment. Basically, you're saying I'm a robot. Don't know if I'm offended by that or not, but we'll go with it. Okay, what is your relation? Oh, no, I've already done that question. Scrap that. Are you ready for the final question that's going to be the hardest question you've ever been asked in your life?
Yes, sir.
What is your next failure going to be?
Ooh, so good. I think the most likely thing I fail on next will be failing to take real stock of that which I've learned in the last few months, traveling, working, attending the Webflow conference, working with clients abroad. The whole last sort of 3 months or so much has happened, and I'm immediately headfirst into another project. And I think it would be a grave mistake to not take even a few days off completely, to journal a bit, go outside, touch some grass, and just kind of pause that period of my life. And I think there's a chance I don't do that, because I know myself, and I also know my schedule and Christmas and all this stuff, right? I think it would be a grave mistake for me to not do that. And I think there's a chance, not insignificant chance, I don't do that. And I think that would be a really big failure, yeah.
What interesting. You're an interesting guy, Henry.
Mm.
I mean, I knew you were, but this episode, I've been really surprised by some of your answers. You're a very thoughtful guy.
Oh, thanks, man.
Reflect on what has passed. That's a really interesting failure. And it reminds me, Ran Segal, he goes away for a week every year on his own to the middle of nowhere, which I remember him telling, I think he was doing a vlog about this, but essentially he can't do anything else but reflect. And I think that's a really powerful way of, just understanding what's been and also what's coming, or how that past experience is going to influence the person that you are now and the person that you are moving forward, and how you react to situations that are coming. So that sounds like a really healthy way to, develop your sense of self, reflect, know who you are more, so that you have maybe a stronger backbone to deal with hard situations that arise in the future. Is there anything else that we need to mention before we wrap up this episode?
Why don't, when you're back in the UK in maybe Jan or Feb, let's go for a pint, and you can ask me if I managed to get that reflection in. I would appreciate that massively.
Hey, maybe we should record that. Webflail pub sessions.
I'm into it.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe we can get sponsored by Breakspears, my favorite beer. Anyway, this is becoming a very much for the English listeners. So let's wrap this up. If anyone wants to ask you any questions about this episode, where is the best place to find you?
Hen Cubed on Twitter. I shan't call it X quite yet. But my DMs are open, or they should be. No pressure. Given what we spoke about earlier, no pressure in how you enter those DMs. No, I'm joking. Please,
you better. Hey, if you've just skipped to the end of this episode and you just you just look in the description, I'm just going to DM this guy, and you haven't listened to the start of this episode, you better go back. Be respectful on the outreach. Okay. Yeah.
But
this has been a beautiful episode. I appreciate you dearly, good sir. At Hen Cubed, that is just hen, literally the word cubed. It's not the little 3. It's just Hen Cubed. Reach out, ask him questions. He's a very insightful guy. He's open to answering things if you approach respectfully, which I am sure any listeners of the WEBFLOW podcast will. Henry, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Jack. Big love. Appreciate you, man. Keep smashing it.
Boosh, you smashed it.